Picture this: a scorching expanse of sand, stretching farther than the eye can see, where the horizon shimmers like a mirage, and the wind carries whispers of a forgotten past. This is the Sahara, a desert so vast it could swallow continents, yet beneath its endless dunes lies a hidden story of human connection. Long before ships ruled the oceans, this sea of sand was alive with movement, as caravans of camels. Each step a heartbeat carried not just goods, but ideas, cultures, and dreams across a landscape that seemed designed to keep people apart. What if I told you the Sahara wasn't just a barrier, but one of history's greatest bridges? Think about the courage it took to cross a place where temperatures could swing from blistering heat to freezing cold in a single day, where water was scarcer than gold, and where a single misstep could mean vanishing into the sands forever. Yet for centuries, traders did exactly that. They braved the unforgiving terrain to link the mighty empires of West Africa, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, to the bustling markets of the Mediterranean and beyond. Salt from the north, gold from the south, spices, textiles, and even books traveled these routes, weaving a web of exchange that shaped economies, sparked innovations, and connected worlds that might otherwise never have met. But here's the real mystery. Why did they do it? What drove these merchants to risk everything, crossing a desert that could kill as easily as it rewarded? The answer lies in something deeper than wealth. It's about the human spirit's unshakable drive to explore, to connect, to push beyond the known. These trade networks weren't just about moving goods. They were the lifeblood of civilizations, carrying stories, religions, and technologies that would change the course of history. So today, we're setting out on a journey of our own, retracing those ancient paths to uncover the secrets of the Sahara's trade routes. From the legendary cities of Timbuktu and Janneh to the hidden oases that kept these caravans alive, we'll discover how a desert that seemed empty was actually pulsing with life, and how its echoes still shape our world today. Ready to step into the footsteps of the traders who dared to cross the impossible? Let's begin. The Sahara's reputation as a barren wasteland couldn't be further from the truth. It was more like a colossal meeting place, a stage where civilizations converged against all odds. Imagine a desert so vast it could cover the entire United States and still have room to spare, yet within its harsh embrace, pockets of life thrived. Oases, those rare jewels of water and palm trees, weren't just stops along the way. They were bustling hubs where traders from distant lands bartered, shared stories, and forged alliances. These watering holes turned into cultural melting pots, where a Berber merchant from the Atlas Mountains might exchange news with a gold trader from the Kingdom of Ghana, their languages as different as their goods, but their purpose united by the desert's demands. What's even more fascinating is how the Sahara itself changed over time, shaping human history in ways we're only beginning to understand. Thousands of years ago, this wasn't a desert at all. It was a greener, wetter place, home to lakes and even rivers. Rock paintings hidden in caves like Tassili and Naja tell the story. Images of giraffes, elephants, and thriving communities where today there's only sand. As the climate shifted, the land dried up, but people adapted. They didn't retreat, they innovated. The introduction of the camel around 2,000 years ago revolutionized travel. These ships of the desert could go days without water, carrying heavy loads across distances that would have been unthinkable before. Suddenly, the Sahara wasn't just survivable, it was navigable, and the trade routes that emerged became the superhighways of their time. But trade wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. Take salt, for example, a commodity so precious in West Africa that it was literally traded ounce for ounce with gold. In the sweltering heat, salt preserved food, healed wounds, and became a symbol of wealth. Meanwhile, gold from mines like those in bambuk-fueled empires minted into coins that circulated as far as Europe and the Middle East. And it wasn't just goods that moved, ideas traveled too. Islamic scholars followed the trade routes, bringing writing, astronomy, and architecture to cities like Timbuktu, where libraries sprang up in the middle of the desert. The Sahara didn't divide people, it connected them, turning what seemed like a barrier into a bridge between worlds. So why did they keep crossing? Because the desert rewarded the bold. A single successful caravan could make a merchant's fortune, but the real treasure was the exchange itself, the way cultures blended, technologies spread, and horizons expanded. The Sahara wasn't just a challenge to overcome, it was an opportunity to thrive. And as we'll see next, the empires that mastered these routes didn't just survive, they flourished, leaving behind legacies that still echo today. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was life itself. In the scorching heat of the Sahara, where food spoiled quickly and sweat drained the body's reserves, salt became as essential as water. But here's the twist. While the desert held mountains of it, the lush kingdoms of West Africa had almost none. That imbalance turned salt into a currency more reliable than coins, sparking a trade so lucrative it built empires. Picture the mines of Taghaza, a city literally carved from salt, where workers chiseled slabs from the earth under a sun so fierce it bleached the landscape white. These slabs, sometimes as large as doors, were strapped to camels in caravans numbering hundreds, even thousands of animals. Each trek south was a gamble. Bandits, sandstorms, and thirst lurked at every turn, but the payoff was unimaginable. In markets like Timbuktu, a single slab of Saharan salt could fetch its weight in gold. Why was salt worth such risk? Beyond preserving food, it was medicine, a symbol of status, and even a form of political power. In the Mali Empire, rulers controlled the salt trade like modern nations control oil, taxing every slab that crossed their borders. Mansa Musa, history's wealthiest man, owed his legendary fortune not just to gold, but to the salt routes that fed his kingdom's economy. And the trade went both ways. While African empires craved salt, Mediterranean merchants coveted West African gold, which flowed north in equal measure. This wasn't just barter, it was a delicate dance of supply and demand spanning continents. The Sahara became a vast marketplace where cultures negotiated not just goods, but trust. A Tuareg trader might spend years building relationships with Sonic merchants, their deals sealed with shared rituals and mutual respect. But the true brilliance of this system lay in its adaptability. When droughts struck or wars disrupted routes, traders pivoted, finding new oases or forging alliances with different tribes. The salt trade wasn't just about wealth, it was about resilience. It taught communities to rely on one another across vast distances, creating networks so sturdy they outlasted kingdoms. Even today, you can trace their legacy in the crumbling ruins of Taghaza, in the camel caravans that still trek across Mali, and in the way we take for granted that pinch of salt on our tables. What began as survival became the foundation of globalization, proving that even the harshest landscapes can't stop human connection. And as we'll see next, the caravans carried more than salt and gold. They carried ideas that would ignite a golden age of learning in the heart of the desert. Gold flowed through the Sahara like invisible rivers, pulling empires and merchants into its glittering current. While salt traveled south, gold moved north, not in gleaming bars or coins as we imagine today, but as dust, nuggets, and intricate jewelry, carefully weighed and traded in secret. The mines of Bambuk and Wangara weren't just holes in the ground. They were the economic engines of West Africa, guarded so fiercely that their exact locations became legend. Arab scholars like al-Bakri wrote of gold growing in the earth like carrots, harvested at dawn by silent workers who vanished before the sun rose high. This wasn't just commerce, it was theater, a deliberate mystique that kept rivals guessing and prices soaring. Controlling these mines meant controlling destiny. The kings of Ghana, for instance, didn't just tax gold, they monopolized it. Every nugget belonged to the ruler, and traders were forbidden to own even a speck without royal permission. This wasn't greed, it was strategy. By hoarding gold, these rulers turned their kingdoms into magnets, forcing foreign merchants to cross the desert and pay tribute just for the chance to trade. And when Mansa Musa of Mali embarked on his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he didn't just bring gold, he weaponized it. His caravan, stretching as far as the eye could see, carried so much gold that its lavish spending in Cairo crashed local markets for years. This wasn't just a religious journey, it was a calculated display of power, proof that the Sahara's wealth could shake the world. But gold's true power lay in its silence. Unlike salt, which roared across the desert in visible slabs, gold moved in whispers. Caravans hid it in false-bottomed sacks, mixed with less precious goods, or even swallowed by trusted couriers. The Tuareg, masters of the desert's hidden paths, became the shadow bankers of their time, guiding shipments through hostile territory for a cut of the profits. And when gold reached the Mediterranean, it transformed minted into dinars that funded wars, built cathedrals, and fueled the Renaissance. The Sahara didn't just trade gold, it was the furnace where global economies were forged. Yet for all its brilliance, gold had a dark edge. The same mines that built empires also drew invaders, from the Almoravid armies to European explorers centuries later. The wealth that unified cultures could also tear them apart, but in its heyday, gold did something extraordinary. It turned the Sahara from a wasteland into a web of trust. A merchant in Sijilmassa might never meet his counterpart in Timbuktu, but both knew the weight of gold didn't lie just in its purity, but in the promises it carried across the sands. The camel wasn't just an animal, it was a revolution on four legs. Imagine a creature so perfectly adapted to the Sahara that it could close its nostrils to sandstorms, store fat in its hump to survive weeks without food, and drink enough water in minutes to last days. When these animals arrived in Africa around the 3rd century, they didn't just change trade, they rewrote the rules of the desert. A single camel could carry up to 500 pounds, more than twice the load of a donkey, and cover 30 miles a day in blistering heat. Suddenly, distances that once seemed impossible became routine, and the Sahara's vastness transformed from a barrier into a highway. But mastering the camel wasn't as simple as strapping on a saddle. The Berbers, nomadic peoples of North Africa, became the undisputed experts of camel handling. They knew every trick, how to pace the animals to conserve energy, where to find hidden water sources, and even how to read the stars to navigate featureless dunes. Their caravans grew into moving cities with thousands of camels stretching for miles, each beast tied nose to tail to prevent straying. At night, the desert would echo with their grunts and the clinking of goods as drivers huddled around fires, sharing stories of near misses with quicks and/or the legendary sand sea, where dunes shifted like ocean waves. Yet for all their resilience, camels were only as strong as their human partners. Caravan leaders faced impossible choices, push the animals too hard, and they'd collapse, move too slowly, and supplies would run out. Sandstorms could bury entire routes overnight, while bandits, like the feared Tuareg raiders, lurked along known trails. There's a reason salt was sometimes called white gold. It wasn't just valuable, it was paid for in blood. Drivers carried weapons and traveled in armed groups, but the real defense was knowledge. The smartest guides took zigzagging paths, changed routes with the seasons, and even planted false rumors to throw off thieves. What's often forgotten is the camel's silent role as a cultural bridge. These animals didn't just carry salt and gold, they transported languages, religions, and technologies. A Quran tucked into a saddlebag could spread Islam to new kingdoms, while a driver's song might blend Arabic rhythms with West African melodies. The camel was the original social network, connecting people who'd never meet but whose lives became intertwined through trade. Even today, the legacy of these caravans lives on not just in history books, but in the DNA of modern logistics. The next time you see a truck barreling down a highway, remember, it's the descendant of a line of camels plodding patiently across the sands, turning the impossible into the everyday. A caravan wasn't just a line of camels, it was a living, breathing society on the move. Imagine 500 animals, each laden with goods, stretching nearly a mile across the desert, flanked by merchants in flowing robes, armed guards scanning the horizon, and guides who could read the land like a book. This wasn't chaos, it was precision. Every person had a role, from the caravan leader who negotiated safe passage with local tribes to the water scouts who memorized the location of hidden wells. Even the camels marched in order, with the strongest at the front to break the wind and the most fragile cargo placed in the middle, shielded from dust and thieves. Survival depended on rhythm. At dawn, the caravan would stir to life, fires lit, camels loaded, prayers murmured to the rising sun. By midday, when the heat became unbearable, they'd halt in whatever shade they could find, spreading woven mats to rest. But the real magic happened at night. Under a sky so vast it felt like another world, the desert transformed into a makeshift city. Tents rose like mushrooms, their fabrics dyed indigo and saffron, while cooks prepared communal meals of dried dates, millet, and salted meat. Storytellers took center stage, spinning tales of past journeys, haunting accounts of mirages that led men astray, or legends of oases that appeared only to the pure of heart. These weren't just campfire stories, they were survival manuals disguised as entertainment, teaching newcomers how to read the desert's moods. Navigation was an art form. Without maps, guides relied on the stars, not just the North Star, but entire constellations that shifted with the seasons. The Tuareg, often called the Blue People for their indigo robes, used the position of the sun against specific rock formations as natural compasses. Some routes were marked by cairns, piles of stones left by generations of travelers, while others followed the bones of camels that had perished on earlier crossings, grim but effective mile markers. The Sahara had its own language, and those who understood it could find water in a place where rain might not fall for years. Discipline was non-negotiable. Breaking rank could mean death. A single stray camel might stumble into quicksand, or a careless noise could attract slavers. Rules were enforced harshly. Thieves lost hands, and fights could exile a man to the dunes with nothing but a skin of water. Yet within this strict order, there was surprising camaraderie. Merchants from rival cities might share tea, exchanging news of distant markets. A Jewish trader from Mansa could bond with a Muslim blacksmith over the quality of Malian gold. The caravan was a microcosm of the world. It connected diverse, interdependent, and resilient. What's easy to forget is how much these journeys cost, not just in gold, but in human grit. Blisters became infections, sandstorms erased trails, and thirst drove men to drink from camel stomachs. Yet every risk was weighed against the reward. A single successful trip could set up a family for life. And so, against all logic, the caravans kept moving, turning the Sahara's emptiness into a tapestry of human determination. Their legacy isn't just in the goods they carried, but in the unspoken truth they proved, that no desert is too vast to divide us when the will to connect burns brighter than the sun. In the middle of nowhere, water becomes everything. Oases weren't just stops along the trade routes, they were the reason those routes existed at all. Picture a cluster of date palms swaying against a backdrop of endless sand, a spring bubbling up from some hidden underground river, a place where camels could finally drink and men could wash the dust from their faces. These weren't just rest stops, they were full-fledged hubs of civilization. Towns like Timbuktu didn't just grow near oases, they grew because of them, transforming barren patches of land into thriving centers of commerce and culture. The secret to these desert miracles lay beneath the surface. Many oases were fed by fossil water, ancient reservoirs trapped deep underground for thousands of years, tapped through intricate systems of wells and tunnels called kanats. In places like Gadaims, entire communities became experts in water management, constructing underground channels that minimized evaporation and kept their lifelines flowing. Date palms played a starring role too. Their roots stabilized the soil, their fronds provided shade, and their fruit offered a portable, energy-rich food source that kept caravans moving. An oasis wasn't just a gift of nature, it was a triumph of human ingenuity, a collaboration between the earth and those who knew how to listen to its secrets. Control over these watery sanctuaries meant power. Wars weren't just fought over gold or salt, they were fought over oases. The Siwa oasis in Egypt, for example, was so strategically vital that Alexander the Great made a detour to consult its famous oracle before marching on Persia. In the Sahara, tribes like the Tuareg guarded key oases fiercely, charging tolls for access or denying water to rivals altogether. But there was an unspoken rule: even enemies shared water in emergencies. The desert taught harsh lessons about interdependence. No matter how rich or powerful you were, without water, you were nothing. What's often overlooked is how oases became cultural crossroads. A trader from Morocco might spend weeks at an oasis like Tamanrasset, swapping stories with a merchant from Timbuktu while their camels rested. Languages blended here, recipes were exchanged, and religions spread. The same water that quenched thirst also nourished ideas, turning these isolated pockets into melting pots of innovation. The Great Mosque of Janeh, with its iconic mud brick towers, owes its existence to the oasis that sustained its builders, proof that even in the harshest landscapes, humanity doesn't just survive, it creates. Yet oases were always dancing on the edge of disaster. Overuse could drain aquifers, and shifting trade routes could leave a once bustling town to wither into ghostly ruins. The very thing that made them precious, their rarity, also made them fragile. Today, modern wells and pipelines have replaced many of the old water systems, but the legacy of these desert lifelines endures. They remind us that in the most unlikely places, life finds a way. And where there's water, there's always the possibility of connection. The glittering gold and precious salt that crossed the Sahara came at a price far beyond their weight in currency, human lives. While caravans carried riches, they also transported people in chains, as the trans-Saharan slave trade wove its dark thread into the fabric of these ancient routes. Unlike the Atlantic trade that would emerge centuries later, this system operated on a smaller scale but stretched across a staggering 1,200 years, its roots tangled with Islamic legal traditions and the complex power dynamics of African kingdoms. Those enslaved weren't anonymous masses, they were artisans, farmers, and even scholars, snatched from villages along the Niger River or sold into bondage by rival rulers after wars. What made this trade uniquely harrowing was its intimacy. Enslaved people often walked the same routes as the merchants who owned them, enduring the Sahara's cruelty side by side with their captors. freezing nights, scorching days, and thirst so severe that some were forced to drink camel urine to survive. Women and children made up the majority, sought after as domestic servants or concubines in North African and Middle Eastern households. Men with specialized skills, like blacksmiths or scribes, might be spared the harshest labor, but their talents didn't shield them from bondage. The journey itself was a filter. Only the strongest survived the march north, where markets in cities like Tripoli and Cairo awaited. But here's what history often overlooks: resistance was constant, if subtle. Some enslaved people memorized Quranic verses to argue for their freedom under Islamic law, which forbade the enslavement of fellow Muslims. Others fled into the desert, risking death to join nomadic tribes or hidden oasis communities. There are accounts of rebellions on caravans where captives seized weapons or sabotaged water supplies, choosing a quick end over slow suffering. And in rare cases, the enslaved rose to astonishing heights, like the Mamluk warriors of Egypt, who turned their bondage into political power, ruling as sultans. The legacy of this trade lingers not just in records, but in DNA. Genetic studies reveal clusters of sub-Saharan ancestry in places like Morocco and Tunisia, silent witnesses to centuries of forced migration. Yet the Sahara's slave trade never defined the region. It existed alongside flourishing art, science, and commerce, a paradox that challenges simple narratives. This wasn't a monolithic system of oppression. It was a spectrum of experiences, from brutal exploitation to unexpected mobility. That complexity doesn't soften the horror, but it does remind us that even in darkness, humanity fights for light. And as we turn now to the intellectual treasures that also crossed these sands, we'll see how the same routes that carried suffering also carried the seeds of enlightenment. Timbuktu's reputation as a city of gold was just the beginning. Its true wealth lay in something far more enduring: knowledge. Nestled between the Sahara's dunes and the Niger River's fertile bend, this legendary city became the beating heart of Africa's intellectual renaissance, a place where scholars traded ideas as eagerly as merchants traded salt. What made Timbuktu extraordinary wasn't just its libraries, though they held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. It was how those texts got there in the first place. Caravans arriving from Cairo, Fez, and Baghdad didn't just unload spices and silk. They carried books carefully wrapped in leather to survive the desert's wrath. And in the bustling markets, scribes worked under shaded canopies, copying texts in Arabic, Songhai, and Tamashek, their ink made from gum, Arabic, and soot, their parchment from goatskin cured in the dry air. The city's golden age bloomed under the Mali Empire, when rulers like Musa turned Timbuktu into a magnet for thinkers. After his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, Musa returned with an Andalusian architect to design the Sankor Mosque, a building that doubled as a university. Here, students debated astronomy under the stars, studied medicine with texts detailing surgical procedures centuries ahead of Europe, and mastered mathematics using treatises on algebra that had traveled all the way from Baghdad. But Sankor wasn't alone. The city buzzed with private libraries, each a treasure trove of knowledge. Take the Ahmed Baba Institute, named after a scholar so prolific his personal collection required 400 camels to transport when he was exiled to Morocco. His works on Islamic law and African history shattered stereotypes, proving that the Sahara wasn't a barrier to learning but a bridge. What's often forgotten is how ordinary people fueled this intellectual revolution. Wealthy merchants endowed scholarships, ensuring even poor students could attend lectures. Women like Fatima al-Fihri, founder of the world's oldest university in Fez, inspired Timbuktu's own female scholars, who contributed to texts on poetry and theology. And the city's griots, oral historians, preserved knowledge in songs and stories, creating a living library that complemented the written word. This wasn't just academia, it was a cultural ecosystem where every level of society valued wisdom. Yet Timbuktu's brilliance was fragile. When Moroccan invaders sacked the city in 1591, they carted off scholars in chains, scattering its intellectual elite. For centuries, families hid manuscripts in trunks, buried them in desert caves, or sewed them into walls, guarding them through generations of turmoil. Today, efforts to digitize these texts reveal astonishing insights from star charts, used to navigate the desert to medical remedies that still hold value. Timbuktu's legacy isn't just about the past. It's a reminder that knowledge, like water, finds a way to survive even in the harshest landscapes. And as we'll see next, the same trade routes that carried these ideas also spread something just as transformative: faith. The indigo-veiled Tuareg didn't just cross the Sahara, they spoke its language. Every whisper of wind, every shift in the sand's texture held meaning for these nomadic masters of the desert. Known as the Blue Men for the dye that stained their skin from their robes, the Tuareg weren't mere guides, they were the Sahara's living compasses. Their navigation skills bordered on supernatural, reading stars like street signs, memorizing dunes that shifted with each storm, and tracking hidden water sources by the behavior of scorpions. Without maps or written records, they carried entire route networks in their heads, secrets so valuable that rival traders would pay fortunes for a single day's guidance. But their power wasn't just in knowledge, it was in identity. Unlike the empires that rose and fell around them, the Tuareg built a culture designed for the desert's extremes. Their distinctive Tajamust veils, worn even by men, weren't just practical, they filtered sand and sun while symbolizing adulthood and honor. Their Tifinagh script, carved into rocks across the Sahara, turned the desert itself into a library of their history. And their matrilineal traditions, where women owned livestock and passed down poetry, gave them a social resilience that outlasted conquerors. When Arab armies or European colonists tried to dominate the trade routes, the Tuareg simply vanished into the dunes, reappearing when the outsiders, parched and disoriented, gave up or paid their tolls. What's often misunderstood is how the Tuareg balanced brutality with diplomacy. Yes, they were feared raiders, capable of lightning strikes on caravans that refused their protection fees. But they were also sophisticated negotiators, brokering deals between warring kingdoms or mediating disputes between merchants. Their reputation as lords of the desert wasn't just about force, it was about trust. A Tuareg promise was binding, their word as solid as the mountains they used as landmarks. They didn't just control the routes, they curated them, maintaining a delicate ecosystem where everyone, from salt miners to gold traders, had a role to play. The real secret to their dominance: adaptation. When trans-Saharan trade declined with the rise of Atlantic shipping, the Tuareg didn't vanish, they pivoted. Some became salt miners in places like Taoudeni, where they still extract slabs using methods unchanged for centuries. Others guided European explorers like Heinrich Barth through lands no outsider could navigate alone. Today, their descendants preserve traditions while navigating modern borders, proving that mastery of the Sahara isn't about resisting change, it's about riding its shifting sands like the camels they once revered. Their legacy lies not just in history books, but in the very idea of the desert as a place not of emptiness, but of endless possibility. Centuries before the world whispered of Mansa Musa's gold-laden pilgrimage, the Ghana Empire stood as West Africa's undisputed titan of trade. Picture a kingdom so wealthy that its rulers allegedly tied their horses to golden boulders, where court officials wore silks spun with gold thread, and where even the dogs, as Arab chroniclers claimed, wore collars of the precious metal. But Ghana's real power wasn't in its glittering displays, it was in something far more strategic: control. Nestled between the Sahara's salt mines and the rainforest's gold fields, this empire didn't just trade commodities, it mastered the art of taxation, turning geography into an economic weapon. Every ounce of salt heading south and every speck of gold moving north passed through Ghana's grip, with the king taking a cut so hefty that foreign merchants grumbled about it for centuries. What made Ghana extraordinary wasn't just its wealth, it was how that wealth built a civilization. While medieval Europe fractured into feudal fiefdoms, Ghana's kings presided over a centralized state with a standing army, a judicial system, and even a rudimentary foreign ministry. Arab diplomats like al-Bakri wrote of a capital city come by sail, where stone palaces stood beside bustling markets, and where disputes were settled by a silent trial, accused men sipping a bitter drink, their innocence proven only if they survived the ordeal. The empire's military might was equally sophisticated: 20,000 archers clad in iron armor, a force so formidable that even the nomadic Almoravids hesitated before challenging them. Yet Ghana's greatest innovation was its economic diplomacy. Understanding that brute force couldn't sustain trade, the kings established a delicate balance. Gold producers were forbidden from selling directly to foreigners, ensuring prices stayed high. Salt merchants, mostly Berbers from the north, were granted protected trade quarters. And in a stroke of psychological genius, the empire propagated myths that gold grew like vegetables in the earth, discouraging outsiders from seeking the mines themselves. This wasn't just commerce, it was theater, a carefully staged performance where perception mattered as much as reality. The empire's fall, when it came, was as dramatic as its rise. Climate change played its part. Droughts shriveled the savannah, weakening agriculture, but the fatal blow came from a combination of overreach and external pressure. The Almoravids, zealous reformers from the desert, finally breached Ghana's defenses in 1076, sacking Kum by sail and disrupting the gold trade. Yet even in decline, Ghana left a blueprint. Its successors, particularly Mali, learned critical lessons: diversify revenue beyond gold, maintain flexible alliances, and never let outsiders learn the true source of wealth. The Sahara's sands may have buried Ghana's cities, but its legacy of innovation, resilience, and the art of turning dust into destiny still shimmers beneath the surface of history. Mansa Musa didn't just visit Mecca, he rewrote the rules of royal travel. When the Malian emperor set out on his Hajj in 1324, he brought an entourage that defied imagination: 60,000 people, including 12,000 slaves clad in Persian silk, 80 camels each carrying 300 pounds of pure gold, and a procession so vast it stretched across the horizon like a mirage. But this wasn't just a religious journey or a display of wealth, it was a masterclass in soft power. Every stop along the way, from Cairo to Medina, became an opportunity to astonish. Gold was handed out so freely in Egypt that its value plummeted, taking a decade to recover. Chroniclers gasped as his caravan passed, scribbling accounts of a king who ruled a land so rich, gold grew like carrots in the sand. The world had never seen anything like it, and that was precisely the point. Behind this spectacle lay a meticulously engineered system. Mali's wealth didn't spring from luck, it was the product of ruthless strategy. The empire controlled every link in the trade chain, from the gold mines of Bambuk to the salt caravans of Taghesa. But unlike Ghana, which relied on taxing trade, Mali went further. It owned the means of production. Mansa Musa's predecessors had conquered the gold fields, ensuring no rival could undercut them. His armies patrolled the Sahara's key oases, guaranteeing safe passage for merchants. And his bureaucrats, many trained at Timbuktu's Sankore University, designed a tax system so efficient that corruption was met with execution. This wasn't just an empire, it was a corporate monopoly dressed in royal robes. Yet Mali's true genius was its cultural investment. The gold Musa spent abroad was a fraction of what he poured into his homeland. Returning from Mecca, he brought architects from Andalusia to design the great mosque of Timbuktu, its towering minarets a beacon for scholars across the Muslim world. He funded libraries, attracting thinkers like Ibn Battuta, who marveled at the empire's literacy rates. Even Mali's legal system was revolutionary, a blend of Islamic law and local customs that allowed diverse communities to thrive under one banner. The empire didn't just accumulate wealth, it weaponized knowledge, turning Timbuktu into the Oxford of the medieval Sahara, but all golden ages tarnish. Mali's decline began with the curse of every great power, overextension. As the empire grew, its borders became impossible to defend. The Songhai, once vassals, began chipping away at its edges. Then came the droughts, decades of erratic rains that withered crops and emptied reservoirs. And perhaps most damning, the very trade routes that built Mali's fortunes shifted. European ships began sailing around Africa, offering faster, safer passage for gold and spices. By the 16th century, the empire that once dazzled the world was a shadow, its cities crumbling, its gold now flowing south to new masters. Yet Mali's legacy lingers in unexpected places. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, one of Europe's first accurate world maps, depicts Mansa Musa seated on a throne of gold, a testament to his enduring myth. The architectural styles he imported still grace West Africa's mosques, and the idea he embodied, that Africa could rival any global power, echoes in movements centuries later. Mali proved that wealth wasn't just about what you mined, but what you built with it. And though its palaces now lie beneath the sands, its lesson remains. True power isn't just in the gold you spend, but in the world you change with it. The Songhai Empire didn't just inherit Mali's trade routes, it reinvented them. When Sunny Ali Burr seized power in 1464, he didn't see a crumbling kingdom, he saw opportunity. Mali's decline had left a power vacuum, and the Songhai, long overshadowed by their neighbors, were ready to pounce. Ali was a warrior king with a vision. His cavalry, mounted on sleek Saharan stallions, swept across the Niger River bend like a sandstorm, capturing Timbuktu and Janai, the twin jewels of trans-Saharan trade. But conquest was just the beginning. What set Songhai apart wasn't just its military might, it was a bureaucratic brilliance that turned commerce into an empire's lifeblood. At its peak, Songhai's markets buzzed with a diversity that would rival modern global hubs. In Gao, the empire's capital, salt from the Sahara mingled with kola nuts from the rainforests, while Venetian glass and Chinese porcelain appeared alongside locally woven textiles. The secret, a tax system so meticulously organized it would make modern accountants envious. Custom posts dotted the Niger River, each levying duties on goods moving north or south. Provincial governors, appointed for their loyalty rather than noble birth, ensured revenues flowed smoothly to the central treasury. And unlike Mali, which relied heavily on gold, Songhai diversified, taxing farmland, fishing rights, even the sale of slaves. This wasn't just trade, it was economic engineering on an imperial scale. Askia Muhammad, known as Askia the Great, elevated this system to art. After overthrowing Sunny Ali's son in 1493, he transformed Songhai into a model of Islamic governance. Pilgrimage to Mecca wasn't just spiritual for Askia, it was strategic. He returned with sweeping reforms, standardized weights and measures to prevent fraud, judges trained in both Sharia law and local customs, and a network of Quranic schools to produce literate administrators. Timbuktu's scholars, once wary of Songhai's warrior roots, now filled its bureaucracy. The empire's legal code became so respected that disputes between Arab and African merchants were often settled in Songhai courts, cementing its reputation as the Sahara's supreme arbiter. Yet for all its sophistication, Songhai's downfall came with shocking speed. The empire's vast size, stretching from the Atlantic to the Hausa lands, made it unwieldy. When Askia's sons turned on each other in a bitter succession struggle, the cracks spread fast. Then came the game changer, gunpowder. In 1591, Moroccan forces armed with European arquebuses crossed the Sahara, their cannons shredding Songhai's cavalry at the Battle of Tondabai. The invaders, lured by legends of gold, found a different prize: Timbuktu's libraries. Scholars were kidnapped, manuscripts looted, and the administrative web that held the empire together unraveled. What makes Songhai's story haunting isn't just its collapse, it's how close it came to enduring. Had its leaders navigated succession peacefully or adapted to new military technologies, the empire might have weathered the storm. Instead, it became a cautionary tale. Even the most brilliant systems are fragile when faced with division and change. Yet Songhai's legacy lingers in the mud brick architecture of the Niger Bend, in the legal traditions of modern West Africa, and in the enduring idea that commerce, when mastered, can build civilizations as surely as armies can destroy them. Islam didn't ride into Africa on horseback, it walked in on sandaled feet, carried by merchants whose prayers echoed across caravan stops at dawn. Unlike conquests that spread faith through force, Islam's journey across the Sahara was a quieter revolution, woven into the fabric of daily trade. Picture a Berber trader unpacking his wares in the Ghana Empire's markets, pausing to unroll a prayer rug beside sacks of salt. To local onlookers, this ritual wasn't an imposition, it was an invitation. Over time, the faith's emphasis on literacy, fairness in commerce, and shared pilgrimage routes made it irresistible to rulers and commoners alike. But here's what's fascinating. Islam didn't erase African traditions, it danced with them, creating something entirely new. Mosques rose along trade routes like waypoints for the soul, their architecture telling a story of fusion. In Janay, the great mosque's towering mud brick spires blended Sudanese styles with North African designs, while Timbuktu's Sankor Mosque doubled as a university where Quranic verses were taught alongside African astronomy. Even the call to prayer adapted. The melodic intonations of West African muezzins carried rhythms reminiscent of traditional griot songs. This wasn't a clash of cultures, it was a conversation. Rulers like Mansa Musa became global icons of Islamic piety while still honoring Mandinka customs, proving faith could travel without demanding uniformity. The real engine of conversion, trust. Muslim merchants earned reputations for honesty, using Arabic contracts in deals that spanned thousands of miles. A trader in Cairo might never meet his counterpart in Kano, but both knew an oath sworn on the Quran was unbreakable. This reliability built spiritual bridges. When African kings saw how Islamic networks facilitated trade from Spain to Persia, many embraced the faith to tap into that connectivity. The Sankor scholars of Timbuktu didn't just study theology, they became economic advisors, their knowledge of Sharia-compliant contracts smoothing disputes between merchants from different worlds. Yet the Sahara's Islam always wore local colors. Amulets containing Quranic verses mirrored traditional protective charms, while Sufi brotherhoods absorbed elements of ancestor veneration. In places like Senegal, Murid traders turned pilgrimage into an art form, their annual journeys to holy cities doubling as commercial expeditions. Even today, you can trace these blended legacies in the cobalt blue robes of Mauritanian clerics, in the way Nigerian market women balance prayer with age-old bargaining rituals, and in the manuscripts of Timbuktu, where astrology charts sit beside tafsir commentaries. The desert didn't just transport faith, it transformed it, proving that the harshest landscapes often breed the most resilient traditions. And as we'll see next, this spiritual exchange was just one thread in the Sahara's vast, interconnected tapestry of ideas. Imagine trading fortunes without ever seeing the other person's face. No haggling, no handshakes, just goods appearing and disappearing like magic in the sand. This was the silent trade, a system so strange to modern eyes that even the ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote about it with awe. Picture a salt merchant arriving at a predetermined spot along the Niger River, carefully stacking his gleaming white slabs before retreating to a safe distance. Hours later, he'd return to find gold dust left in their place, no words exchanged, no names known. If the amount seemed fair, he'd take it and vanish into the dunes. If not, he'd simply walk away, leaving the gold untouched until the invisible traders adjusted their offer. This wasn't commerce as we know it. It was a high-stakes game of trust played across the silence of the Sahara. The brilliance of this system lay in its simplicity. Without shared language or cultural norms, misunderstandings could spark violence, but silent trade removed that risk entirely. The Wangara gold miners of West Africa, for instance, guarded their sources with near-religious secrecy. By never meeting outsiders, they ensured no one could follow them back to the veins of gold hidden deep in the rainforest. On the flip side, Berber salt traders from the north had their own reasons for discretion, avoiding bandits who might ambush a caravan carrying gold on its return journey. The desert became a neutral ground where both sides won. Wealth changed hands without ever revealing faces or homelands. But here's what's even more fascinating: this wasn't just about safety. Silent trade was a psychological masterstroke. Without direct interaction, neither party could be pressured into unfair deals. The Wangara might leave a small pile of gold, testing how much salt the Berbers would offer. If the response was generous, they'd gradually increase their gold over subsequent trades, building mutual respect through actions, not words. Anthropologists call this competitive altruism, a dance of generosity that, paradoxically, maximized profits for both sides. The unspoken rule was clear: cheat, and the trade spot would lie empty forever. The legacy of these wordless exchanges lingers in unexpected places. Modern online marketplaces operate on similar principles: sellers and buyers rating each other without meeting, algorithms standing in for the desert's silent judges. Even the term bargaining in good faith echoes those ancient traders who trusted the system more than the stranger behind it. The Sahara's silent trade proves something profound. Sometimes the loudest deals are the ones made in silence. And as we'll see next, these ingenious systems didn't just move goods, they moved entire civilizations forward. Navigating the Sahara demanded more than just courage. It required an encyclopedic knowledge of a landscape that refused to stay still. Picture a caravan leader squinting at the night sky, not just seeing stars but reading them like a celestial roadmap. The North Star, fixed and unwavering, served as their true north, while constellations like Orion's belt acted as seasonal signposts, shifting positions to mark the passage of time. But stars alone weren't enough. The desert's master navigators, often Tuareg or Berber guides, memorized the subtle language of the wind. A breeze carrying the scent of acacia might hint at an oasis miles away, while a sudden shift in temperature could warn of an approaching sandstorm long before the sky darkened. Landmarks were lifelines, but not the kind you'd find on a modern map. A single twisted rock formation, a particular dune that never fully eroded, or even the bones of a long-dead camel could serve as critical waypoints. The Ahaga Mountains in modern-day Algeria, for instance, weren't just a backdrop, they were a navigational anchor. their jagged peaks visible for days in every direction. Water scouts, the unsung heroes of every caravan, committed the location of hidden wells to memory, their knowledge so precise they could find a seepage hole no wider than a handspan beneath seemingly featureless sand. The camels themselves were living compasses. Experienced guides watched the animals for clues a sudden restlessness might signal underground water, while a change in their gait could indicate treacherous terrain ahead. Even the desert's mirages, often dismissed as hallucinations, held useful information. The way light bent over certain stretches of sand revealed hidden dips or elevations, allowing navigators to adjust their path before stumbling into a sinkhole. Survival hinged on a delicate balance of observation and intuition. A misplaced footstep could mean wandering into the Thames-roofed basin, a region so barren the Tuareg called it the land of thirst. To prevent such disasters, knowledge wasn't written down, it was woven into songs, chanted in rhythmic verses that encoded distances between wells, the angle of specific dunes, or the phases of the moon when certain routes were safest. A single guide's death could strand an entire caravan, making oral traditions as vital as any physical supply. What's astonishing isn't just that they crossed the Sahara, it's that they did so with a precision that rivaled modern GPS. When European explorers like René Caillier attempted the same journey centuries later, they marveled at how local guides could walk for weeks without landmarks, arriving within meters of their target. This wasn't luck, it was a science honed over generations where every grain of sand told a story, and the sky was a map written in light. The desert didn't give up its secrets easily, but for those who listened, it whispered the way home. Bandits lurked like shadows in the dunes, turning every trade route into a potential death trap. The Tuareg, masters of the desert, weren't always guides. Some became legendary raiders, striking with terrifying precision. Cloaked in indigo robes that blended into twilight, they'd emerge from nowhere, their camels bred not for burden but for speed. A caravan's worst nightmare wasn't the Sahara's heat or thirst. It was the distant glint of a spear tip at sunrise, signaling an ambush. These weren't random thieves but strategists who studied routes like chessboards, waiting for the moment guards grew complacent or supplies ran low. Traders adapted with ingenuity worthy of their adversaries. Wealthy merchants hired Askar guards, seasoned warriors from the Sahel, armed with curved daggers and poisoned arrows. Caravans traveling at night moved in silence, wrapping camel bells in cloth to mute their approach. Some took radical detours, following paths known only to a handful of guides. The Azalai salt caravans of Mali, for instance, abandoned straight lines altogether, weaving serpentine routes between invisible landmarks only veterans could decipher. Even the camels played a role, strapping bundles of thorny acacia branches to their flanks created makeshift armor against raiders' blades. Deception became as vital as defense. Clever traders hid gold in hollowed-out logs or sewed precious stones into the linings of waterskins. One Berber merchant, chronicled in a Timbuktu manuscript, filled his lead camel's saddlebags with sand, letting bandits waste precious minutes ransacking decoys while the real treasure, a single diamond, traveled in the belly of a goat. Others exploited the desert psychology, spreading rumors of cursed goods or planting false maps to lead raiders into dead-end canyons. But the most effective shield wasn't steel or trickery, it was diplomacy. Savvy merchants paid protection fees to local tribes, essentially purchasing safe passage like a toll. The Tuareg, despite their fearsome reputation, honored these agreements fiercely. A caravan under their symbol could cross hostile territories untouched. These deals weren't just transactions, they were relationships. A trader might gift a tribal chief with Venetian glass or Iberian swords years before needing their routes, building trust that outlasted any single journey. The greatest irony, many raiders were former protectors. Droughts or political shifts could turn allies into predators overnight. A guide who navigated caravans safely one season might lead his kin to plunder them the next when famine struck. The Sahara didn't deal in heroes or villains, only survivors. And in that relentless dance between predator and prey, both sides etched a brutal truth into the dunes. The desert's real currency wasn't gold or salt, but the cunning to keep it. Behind every caravan that crossed the Sahara, there were women calculating risks, negotiating deals, and pulling strings from the shadows. While history books highlight the male merchants and warriors, the desert's trade networks thrived because of women like Fatima al-Fihri, who funded Timbuktu's great libraries, or the anonymous Sonic matriarchs who controlled cola nut exchanges in secret markets. Their influence wasn't limited to the sidelines, it was woven into the very fabric of commerce. In Horsaland, Queen Amina didn't just sit on a throne, she rode into battle with armored cavalry, securing the salt routes that fed her kingdom's wealth. Her legend grew so vast that centuries later, metalworkers across West Africa still craft ceremonial swords in her name. What made these women so formidable? Necessity. In societies where men were often away for years on caravan routes, women became de facto heads of households managing farms, crafts, and local trade. The Mossi women of Burkina Faso, for instance, turned shea butter production into an economic powerhouse, exporting it northward to moisturize the sun-scorched skin of desert traders. In Genève, female potters held monopolies on ceramic vessels used to transport gold dust, their fingerprints pressed into every transaction. Even Islamic legal traditions, which often restricted women's public roles, couldn't stifle their ingenuity. Some used the Islamic court system to their advantage, like the Mauritanian merchant Aisha bint Ahmad, who sued male competitors for breach of contract and won. The real power brokers operated through informal networks. A Tuareg woman might not join the caravan, but her dowry of camels financed its journey. Berber wives in Sijil Musa acted as bankers, extending credit to traders using a system of trust built on kinship rather than paperwork. And in the Sahel, female griots oral historians were the keepers of trade secrets, memorizing price fluctuations and alliance shifts that no written record could capture. Their knowledge was so vital that warring kings would spare their lives during raids, knowing these women held the maps to future prosperity. Perhaps the most overlooked role was that of the mediator. When tensions flared between Arab salt traders and African gold merchants, it was often women like Nana Asma'u of the Sokoto Caliphate who brokered peace, using poetry and diplomacy to bridge cultural divides. Their influence extended beyond mere negotiation. They shaped tastes. The indigo-dyed fabrics favored by Tuareg elites, those markets were controlled by women weavers in Kano. The gold earrings that became status symbols in Marrakesh, designed by female artisans in Mali. The Sahara's trade routes weren't just arteries of goods, they were channels of female resilience. From the queen who commanded armies to the widow who turned a handful of seeds into a textile empire, these women proved that commerce wasn't just about what you carried, it was about the alliances you forged and the legacies you planted in the sand. Their stories whisper through the ledger books and loom patterns waiting to be heard. For centuries, the Sahara had been the world's unshakable bridge until the ocean stole its purpose. When Portuguese caravels began creeping down Africa's west coast in the 1400s, they didn't just discover new lands, they unraveled an ancient system. These ships, tiny compared to the desert's vastness, carried a revolutionary idea: trade without camels, no more brutal sandstorms, no bandits demanding tribute, no months spent crossing wastelands. A merchant in Lisbon could now send goods to the Gold Coast in weeks, not seasons, and the Sahara's chokehold on commerce began to slip. At first, the change was subtle. Gold that once traveled north by camels started flowing south to Portuguese forts like Elmina, where it was loaded onto ships bound for Europe. Coastal kingdoms like Benin and Congo grew fat on this new trade, while inland empires scrambled to adapt. The Songhai ruler Askia Ishak Roman II tried to fight back, sending envoys to Morocco in 1588 with a desperate plea: help us expel these sea-bound intruders. The Moroccans responded with an invasion, not of solidarity but of greed. Their capture of Timbuktu in 1591 wasn't a rescue mission. It was a last-ditch raid to seize what remained of the desert's dwindling wealth. Yet the Sahara didn't fade quietly. Some routes, like the Azalai salt caravans, persisted out of sheer necessity. No ship could replace Taghaze's salt slabs in the Sahel's diets. Cities like Agadez became refuges for caravan culture, their labyrinthine alleys still echoing with the languages of lost trade networks. Even the camels, those enduring symbols of desert resilience, found new roles transporting goods between inland regions untouched by ships. The ocean might have won the battle, but the Sahara refused to surrender its soul. The real tragedy lay in what vanished with the trade routes. Timbuktu scholars, once courted by emperors, now watched their libraries gather dust as patronage dried up. The intricate web of alliances between Berber nomads and Sahelian farmers frayed without the glue of commerce, leaving droughts to spark conflicts where trade once kept peace. And the shared identity forged over a millennium of exchange, the blend of Arab, African, and Berber cultures began to splinter into the divisions colonialism would later exploit. But here's the twist: the Sahara's legacy didn't disappear, it submerged. The Islamic scholarship nurtured in Timbuktu resurfaced in Nigerian madrasas centuries later. The indigo dyes beloved by Tuareg elites inspired West Africa's modern textile industries. Even the trust-based trade practices lived on in informal cross-border commerce today, where a handshake still outweighs a contract. The desert's golden age ended not with a bang, but with a slow receding, like a caravan vanishing into the dunes, leaving only footprints for the wind to erase. Yet those footprints, however faint, still mark the path of a world that once moved to the rhythm of camel hooves and human determination. Beneath the shifting sands of the Sahara, time capsules from a forgotten world are slowly coming to light. In Mauritania's windswept plains, archaeologists recently uncovered the remnants of a caravanserai, a sprawling desert inn where traders once rested beneath palm-thatched roofs. The site's crumbling walls still bear charcoal sketches of camels and merchants, etched by travelers waiting out sandstorms centuries ago. Nearby, excavators found something even more startling: a cache of Roman coins mingled with West African gold weights, proof that goods and ideas flowed farther than historians ever imagined. Every shovel of sand reveals how wrong we were about the desert's emptiness. Satellite imagery now pinpoints ghostly outlines of settlements beneath the dunes, their grid-like streets suggesting planned communities rather than temporary stops. One such discovery, the lost city of Tebelbola in Algeria, stunned researchers with its advanced irrigation channels, a testament to how societies thrived in this harsh landscape. But the real revelations come from everyday objects. A broken clay tablet in Niger bearing cuneiform script, likely carried from Mesopotamia, glass beads from Venice found near Timbuktu, even Chinese porcelain fragments that somehow crossed two continents before ending up in a Malian trash pit from the 14th century. These aren't just artifacts, they're puzzle pieces reshaping our map of the ancient world. The Sahara guards its secrets fiercely, At the ruined city of Ayuda Coast, once a thriving hub for gold trade, archaeologists face a race against time. Shifting dunes keep burying and unearthing structures at random, revealing a stone warehouse one season only to swallow it the next. In 2018, a team working near the Taoudeni salt mines stumbled upon a mass grave of camels, their skeletons arranged in a perfect circle, a ritual burial hinting at spiritual practices caravan leaders used to bless their journeys. Nearby, laser scans exposed hidden trails beneath the sand, their zigzagging paths suggesting traders avoided not just bandits, but ancient climatic hazards we're only now beginning to understand. Perhaps most tantalizing are the mysteries still lurking below. Ground-penetrating radar in Chad recently detected what might be a submerged trading post beneath Lake Chad's shrinking shores, while rumors persist of a Black Pyramid in the Tenere Desert, said to hold records of the Sahara's green past. With every discovery, one truth becomes clearer. This wasn't just a wasteland crossed out of necessity, but a living network of cultures that adapted, innovated, and connected against all odds. The sands may erase footprints, but they can't bury the evidence of human ingenuity, and who knows what else still waits, silently preserved in the desert's dry embrace. The Sahara we know, a vast, sun-scorched expanse of dunes and rock, was once a world of lakes, rivers, and grasslands so lush it supported herds of elephants and giraffes. Rock paintings hidden in Algeria's Tassili Ennaja caves tell the story. Vivid images of hippos swimming in long-vanished waterways, hunters pursuing antelope through forests that vanished millennia ago. This wasn't some fleeting wet period, it was a fundamental transformation. Around 5,000 years ago, a gradual shift in Earth's orbit tilted rainfall patterns and the land began to dry. Lakes evaporated into salt flats, rivers retreated underground, and the green Sahara gave way to the desert we recognize today. But here's what's fascinating. Instead of fleeing, the people who called this place home did something extraordinary. They turned crisis into opportunity. As water sources vanished, communities clustered around the few remaining oases, transforming them into natural meeting points. What began as survival strategies soon sparked something bigger: trade. The very scarcity that could have divided people became the reason to connect. A tribe skilled at mining salt from drying lakebeds might barter with another group who knew where the last pockets of game animals survived. Over generations, these small exchanges grew into networks stretching thousands of miles. The Sahara's drying didn't just force adaptation, it incentivized innovation. Take the camel, originally domesticated in Arabia. These animals were perfectly suited to the new arid reality. By around 300 BC, they'd revolutionized travel, enabling caravans to cross stretches of desert that would have been unimaginable on foot. The dunes that seemed like barriers became highways. Climate change didn't just alter the landscape, it reshaped human ambition. As resources grew scarcer, the value of long-distance trade skyrocketed. Gold from the Niger River's headwaters, salt from the depths of the desert, and even exotic goods like Mediterranean coral or Indian spices became worth the unimaginable risk of crossing the Sahara. The empires that mastered these routes, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, didn't just survive the changing climate, they thrived because of it. Their wealth was built on understanding a fundamental truth. In a world where water was life, controlling the paths between oases meant controlling destiny. The echoes of this ancient transformation feel eerily relevant today. As modern climates shift, the Sahara's past offers a provocative question: can scarcity breed ingenuity rather than collapse? The desert's traders didn't just endure their changing world, they reimagined it, turning isolation into connection and survival into prosperity. Their legacy isn't just in the goods they moved, but in the lesson they left. When the world changes, the bold don't retreat, they rebuild. And sometimes the harshest landscapes birth the most resilient ideas. The Sahara's ancient trade routes may no longer carry gold-laden caravans, but their pulse still beats beneath modern Africa's surface. Take the Tuareg nomads, whose indigo-blue robes still streak across the dunes as they guide salt caravans along the same paths their ancestors walked 1,000 years ago. These aren't relics performing for tourists, they're keepers of a living tradition, navigating by stars and wind patterns just as their grandparents taught them. In Mali's Tao-Udeni mines, workers still hack salt slabs from the earth with hand tools, loading them onto camels bound for markets where this white gold remains a dietary staple. The methods haven't changed much since Mansa Musa's era, because in a land where machinery falters under the desert's harshness, centuries-old knowledge often proves more reliable than technology. Meanwhile, Timbuktu's labyrinthine alleys whisper of its former glory. The Sankor Mosque still stands, its pyramidal minaret a beacon for scholars studying the city's rescued manuscripts, fragile pages filled with medieval star charts, medical treatises, and poetry that survived centuries hidden in attics and buried in desert caves. Local families who safeguarded these texts during periods of conflict now work with archivists to digitize them, ensuring the Sahara's intellectual legacy isn't lost to time. The Jingraba Mosque's annual replastering ritual, where entire neighborhoods gather to apply fresh mud to its walls, echoes the communal spirit that once made this city a crossroads of civilizations. But the Sahara's influence stretches far beyond nostalgia. Modern trans-African highways often trace ancient caravan routes, their asphalt overlaying invisible trails of camel hoofprints. The bustling Grand Marché in Agadez, Niger, still operates as a multilingual trading hub where Hausa, Tuareg, and Arab merchants barter everything from solar panels to handmade leather, a direct descendant of the medieval markets that once connected continents. Even conflict in the region carries eerie historical echoes. Competition over uranium mines and water sources mirrors past battles for control of salt and gold routes, proving geography still dictates destiny. Perhaps most strikingly, the desert's old networks have found new life in unexpected ways. Mobile money platforms like M-Pesa owe their success to trust-based systems reminiscent of caravan trade agreements, while Saharan shadow economies still rely on face-to-face deals sealed with handshakes rather than contracts. The annual festival Oasis in Mali, though now displaced by insecurity, once brought musicians from across Africa to perform under the stars, a spiritual heir to the cultural exchanges that flourished when caravans paused at oases. The Sahara's true legacy isn't just in what remains, but in how its history of adaptation still guides those who call this harsh landscape home. When droughts strike or political winds shift, the old lessons resurface. Diversify your routes, nurture alliances, and always respect the desert's power. The camels may carry smartphones now instead of salt slabs, but the rhythm of their footsteps still syncs with the heartbeat of a trade network that refuses to fade. Proof that even in our hyper-connected age, some bridges are too resilient to collapse. Hollywood loves its deserts barren and its history simple cowboys, camels, and endless dunes where nothing ever happens. But the real Sahara, it was more like a medieval internet, humming with connections that linked empires, sparked innovations, and shaped global trade for centuries. The myth of an empty wasteland isn't just wrong. It erases one of history's most dynamic meeting places. Think about Timbuktu at its peak. A skyline dotted with libraries, its streets buzzing with scholars debating in Arabic, Songhai, and Hebrew, its markets stocked with books from Baghdad alongside gold from Guinea. This wasn't some isolated outpost, it was the Silicon Valley of its day, a place where ideas moved as fast as camels could carry them. The stereotype of a dark continent cut off from the world collapses under the weight of evidence. When Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta visited Mali in the 14th century, he marveled at cities where justice was so swift that a visitor could leave gold unattended for months and return to find it untouched. Meanwhile, European maps from the same era depicted West African kings seated on thrones of gold, their wealth legendary enough to inspire Columbus's voyages. The Sahara didn't separate Africa from the world, it fused cultures together. Take the humble kola nut, chewed as a stimulant by West African farmers. It became a luxury item in Cairo's coffeehouses, traded northward by Berber merchants who also carried Islamic legal texts back south. This was globalization centuries before the term existed. So why do these myths cling so stubbornly? Partly because history favors conquerors with quills. European colonizers arriving late to Africa's story dismissed the ruins they found as mysterious, rather than admitting they'd stumbled on the remnants of sophisticated economies. A Ghanaian proverb says, "Until the lion tells the tale, the hunt will always glorify the hunter." For too long, the Sahara's narrative was written by outsiders who saw only sand, missing the universities, the thriving artisan guilds, the diplomatic envoys crossing deserts to sign treaties. Even the word caravan conjures exotic strangers in Western imagination, ignoring the African merchants who financed these journeys and the local guides who made them possible. The truth is, the Sahara's vibrancy wasn't an exception, it was the rule. Look at the Garamantes, a civilization in modern-day Libya that built underground tunnels to farm the desert, their cities thriving on trade with Rome. Or the Dihar Tichet ruins in Mauritania, where stone settlements date back over 3,000 years, proving the desert was a cradle of innovation long before camels arrived. These weren't primitive societies eking out survival. They were pioneers of urban planning, hydrology, and cross-cultural exchange. Correcting these myths isn't just about accuracy, it's about justice. When we reduce the Sahara to a backdrop for adventure movies, we strip generations of their agency, their brilliance, their rightful place in the story of human progress. The desert wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge, and the people who crossed it, they weren't extras in someone else's epic. They were the protagonists of their own. Those desert traders didn't just move goods, they mastered the art of turning scarcity into opportunity. Consider the salt caravans, crossing hundreds of miles without GPS or weather apps, guided only by generations of hard-won knowledge. Their secret wasn't just endurance, it was adaptability. When a sandstorm erased familiar landmarks, they navigated by the stars. When bandits stalked known routes, they pioneered new ones through uncharted dunes. This wasn't reckless risk-taking, it was calculated innovation born from necessity. Modern entrepreneurs could learn from their playbook. Constraints often fuel creativity better than unlimited resources ever could. Trust was the invisible currency that made the Sahara's trade possible. A merchant in Musa might never meet his business partner in Timbuktu, yet they conducted deals worth fortunes based on reputation alone. Islamic legal contracts helped, but the real glue was social capital networks of family ties, tribal alliances, and communal accountability. Break a promise, and word would spread faster than a desert wind, blacklisting you from future caravans. In our age of digital transactions and faceless corporations, there's power in remembering that commerce thrives when human connections outweigh short-term gains. The desert's greatest lesson might be its quiet rebuttal to isolationism. At oases like Gadaims, Berber traders shared wells with Songhai merchants, exchanging not just goods but recipes, music, and marital alliances. The Sahara could have been a barrier, yet those who crossed it chose to see a bridge. their legacy whispers that diversity isn't just tolerance, it's competitive advantage. The empires that flourished, like Mali under Mansa Musa, were those that welcomed foreign ideas, from Andalusian architects to Persian scribes, blending them with local traditions to create something entirely new. Resilience wasn't a buzzword for these traders, it was a survival skill. When the Moroccan invasion shattered Timbuktu's golden age, scholars didn't abandon their libraries, they smuggled manuscripts into the desert, hiding texts in caves and trunks for safekeeping. Centuries later, their descendants unearthed these treasures, proving that knowledge, like trade routes, can go dormant but never truly dies. In an era of climate crises and supply chain disruptions, their stubborn refusal to surrender to circumstance feels strikingly relevant. Perhaps most unexpectedly, the Sahara teaches us about sustainability long before the term existed. Caravans moved at the pace the land allowed, resting camels at oases to prevent overgrazing. Water wasn't just a resource, it was sacred, with disputes over wells settled through careful negotiation rather than force. Even the salt mines of Taghaza operated in cycles, giving exhausted seams time to regenerate. These weren't eco-warriors by modern standards, they were pragmatists who understood that exploiting the desert too greedily meant killing the goose that laid the golden eggs. The next time you sprinkle salt on your meal or admire a gold necklace, remember, these everyday luxuries once traveled paths forged by ingenuity and grit. The Sahara's traders left no grand monuments, but their real legacy isn't in stone, it's in the timeless truth that connection, whether across dunes or digital networks, remains humanity's most valuable commodity. The Sahara's trade networks weren't just lines on a map, they were living, pulsing systems that breathed life into continents. Imagine the ripple effect of a single camel caravan setting out from Musa. Its salt slabs would eventually sweeten meals in the rainforests of Ghana, while the gold it carried north might mint coins in Venice or Damascus. This wasn't mere commerce, it was a symphony of interdependence, where the desert's harshness forced innovation and trust became as vital as water. The real marvel isn't that these routes existed, but how they endured for over 1,000 years, surviving droughts, wars, and the rise and fall of empires. Take something as simple as a book in medieval Timbuktu. The paper might have traveled from Damascus, the ink from Morocco, bound by leather tanned in Genève, and studied by a scholar whose ancestors hailed from the Niger Delta. Every page was a testament to the Sahara's role as history's original global marketplace, where ideas moved as freely as spices. Even the desert's dangers, sandstorms that erased trails, bandits who lurked like wolves, couldn't stifle the human drive to connect. The caravans adapted, developing fail-safes like the silent trade or diversifying routes, so that if one path vanished beneath the dunes, another could rise in its place. What's easy to overlook is how these networks shaped the modern world. The gold that built Mali's fortunes funded European banks during the Renaissance. The mathematical concepts preserved in Timbuktu's libraries eventually filtered into global scientific thought. Even the concept of credit, so central to today's economy, traces roots to Saharan merchants who traded on trust across vast distances. The desert didn't just bridge Africa, it linked hemispheres, proving that geography is no match for ingenuity. Yet the Sahara's greatest gift wasn't material wealth, but the lesson etched into its sands: isolation is an illusion. In an era where borders dominate headlines, the desert whispers an older truth. The Berber trader sharing tea with a Malian merchant, the Jewish scholar debating astronomy with a Tuareg guide. These encounters remind us that curiosity and mutual benefit can dissolve even the starkest divides. The Sahara's legacy isn't just in the gold or salt left behind. but in the blueprint it offers for a world that chooses connection over walls. So the next time you see a map of Africa, don't just see empty yellow space. Picture the caravan snaking like threads through the dunes, the oases humming with languages, the libraries where star charts and poems outlasted empires. The Sahara wasn't a barrier, it was a crossroads, and its stories are far from finished. If these echoes of the past resonate with you, join us as we keep unearthing history's hidden connections. Drop a comment below what desert mystery should we explore next, and don't forget to subscribe. The next chapter of the adventure is always just over the horizon.